So good afternoon, everyone. So happy to have you here. I'm Cynthia Wilkerson. I'm the WDFW Lands Division Manager, so I oversee and set direction for the acquisition and stewardship of DFW lands throughout the state, and support all the great work out there on the ground so that folks can get out there, enjoy it, and it's great for fish, wildlife, habitat, and people. I really just would so much prefer to be sitting in an actual room with you all, but here we are in the world that we're in, making the most of what we've got. So first and foremost, just wanted to give you, a big thank you, a big appreciation for taking the time to be here this afternoon to delve into the draft of our recreation strategy for WDFW-managed lands. I know that life is really full for so many and all of us, and you all go the extra mile in being gracious partners and participants and engaging in the work of WDFW, and appreciate your taking the time to engage in this body of work with us here today. And of course, thank you as always for the work that you do on the advisory committee, or committees in some cases, that you participate in on behalf of WDFW. So again, thank you so much. It's so great to see so many great folks, good partners, good friends out there joining us here today. I also do want to just send an apology for our original cancellation of this, the original date for this meeting. It just was sort of a confluence of all the things that just didn't make it, didn't set us up for success on a whole, and we had to step back and create a bit more space for all of us. So appreciate your kind of hanging in there with us, appreciate you being here with us today. We are really excited to share this draft of the 10-year draft strategy for recreation on WDFW managed lands. This body of work is really a long time coming. Our portfolio of lands throughout the state, with on the order of 1 million acres and over 450 water access areas, is just a tremendous benefit and value to the people and the wildlife, fish and wildlife of the state of Washington. And we're just so pleased to be able to engage and really set this vision and get some clarity on so many bodies of work having to do with recreation management that we know we have needed for quite some time. It's just taken some directed resources to be able to get here. So we are so excited to be here. I would just remind you that we are still very much in the draft version of this. We're in the SEPA comment period. That period is over at the end of February. We have the draft is available online. It's also available in both English and Spanish. So that is very exciting. And with that, I think we'll just, I'm going to start off with just a little bit of orientation of DFW and our lands. Many of you are very familiar with that. And then I'm going to hand it off to Joe Sisolak, our Recreation and Planning Section Manager, to take us through the details of the plan itself, of the strategy itself, and then we've got time for Q&A at the end. So thank you all for being here and for putting your name and affiliations in the chat. I think folks are pretty well aware that the mission of the Department of Fish and Wildlife is to preserve, protect, and perpetuate fish, wildlife, and ecosystems while providing sustainable fish and wildlife recreation and commercial opportunities. All of that work comes to bear when you look at the land base that we manage for WDFW managed lands. We provide habitat for wild fish and wildlife. We restore habitat for fish and wildlife. We provide recreational and commercial opportunities on those lands. So it's a clear nexus there. Next slide, Joel. So WDFW lands are for protecting land and water for wildlife and people. And the vision that we have is a Washington where fish and wildlife thrive in healthy habitats and where people experience and enjoy our state's natural treasures for generations to come. And this is what we're charged to create as a body. Next slide. In order to do that, we provide active management that supports access for fishing, hunting, and other wildlife-related recreation. We foster experiences and exploration, and we preserve natural and cultural heritage. So all of these things occur on those lands throughout the state, which you can see on this map. I always think it's helpful for people to see where those acres and access areas actually are located. The predominance of the acreage is on the eastern side of the state, the larger blocks. But we all know that smaller blocks of habitat on the west side where there's more population pressure also provide really important and priority habitats and places to recreate. So that is the portfolio and kind of the context. And that I think I'm handing it over to Joel.
Thanks, Cynthia. That's a great way to get started. So I want to talk a little bit about the 10-year rec strategy for DFW managed lands. First, a little more context to add to what Cynthia's already provided. One thing that the department has been wrestling with and acknowledging along with other recreation land managers, not only in Washington, but across the country, is that the landscape for managing outdoor recreation is shifting. It actually has been shifting for some time. The population of the state has dramatically grown in the last even 10 years, certainly 20 years. The population demographics are shifting. Our state's becoming more diverse. We have more people for whom English is a second language. And then also related to recreation, what people want to do outdoors is also shifting. You know, DFW is best known, and I hope we will continue to be well known for providing opportunities for hunting and fishing and wildlife viewing on the lands we manage. And those will continue to remain really central to both our mission as well as our identity as an agency, but also recognize that the folks who are coming to recreate are doing a lot of different things. And while the numbers of people hunting and fishing especially have been steadily declining over recent decades, the numbers of people who are doing other things, which is kind of what, I know it's a sort of a busy slide, but what this graph shows is that what people want to do when they get to an outdoor space is changing. Heavy emphasis on trail-related uses, whether that's walking or biking or equestrian use, as well as motorized recreation. We know a lot of the folks who are coming to the lands we manage are coming to use the water, to access the water. We manage 450 plus water access areas around the state. You saw all the little blue dots on the last slide with the map. A lot of people are coming to those. They're some of the heaviest used spaces that we manage. A lot of people are coming to these lands to access the water. So we know that what people want to do is changing. We also know that the profile of users is shifting in terms of how frequently people are going outdoors. I know that during COVID, especially, there's been this explosion of interest in recreating outside as we all have fled our homes to try to get some fresh air and some space and some time with our families outside of our houses. And but in general, the long-term trend is we're moving from people who like to recreate frequently, where it's really a part of their lifestyle, sometimes recreating every weekend, sometimes even more frequently. We're seeing a shift to less frequent use, where people are going maybe once or twice a year. And the implication of that, of course, is that the expertise of the folks who are visiting public lands is different, and sometimes the knowledge is a little bit thinner than some of the hardcore recreationists who have been in the past kind of the regular participants in outdoor recreation. So we have an added challenge around education and engagement. I mentioned COVID. There were plenty, I'm sure a lot of folks on this call saw the impacts directly or maybe read in the media. I think the Seattle Times used the term recreation with WREAK. We did see a ton of people going outside, which was really great, but also has had an impact. And some of the adaptation and work we've been doing in the last 2 years is really trying to catch up with this explosion of demand for access to public spaces. And then lastly, I'll mention here is the impacts of climate change. Again, this summer, we had to close some lands due to forest fire. Some folks, and I hope folks who were affected on this call are safe, and all their property is safe. I know that the flooding that we've seen in recent years has been pretty devastating for some communities, and things like fires and flooding and smoke from fire really does impact recreation. So that's another thing that we have to adapt to. And then the other just reality associated with outdoor recreation is that it impacts natural, cultural, and tribal resources. So the ultimate goal of this plan, of this strategy, is to protect those natural, cultural, and tribal resources, improve protection from where they are currently, while also enhancing recreation and improving access and recreation experiences from where they are currently. If we can do those two things, that'll be the measure of our success. And then the other kind of meta goal that we have is strengthening relationships. And you'll see these goals hopefully threaded through the strategic priorities as I outline them, with a heavy emphasis on the fact that DFW can't take care of the lands that we manage alone. It requires a lot of partnership, collaboration, and managers with partners like yourselves and advisory committees, as well as the recreating public itself. So you'll hear these three themes kind of throughout. So the rec strategy is broken into 6 strategic priorities, and I'll go into each of these. So the first is around use and impact monitoring. This is really about the getting a better handle on the data and having consistent access to the data we need to understand who's coming to DFW managed lands, what they're doing, what they want to do, and then also on the impact side to understand what are the impacts of outdoor recreation on the natural, cultural, and tribal resources. And this is something that we've spoken a lot with a variety of groups about. DFW, and I hope some of our tribal partners are on the call today. We did a series of meetings over the last year and longer, speaking with various tribal governments from across the state about what are some of their concerns around outdoor recreation. And what we heard pretty clearly was that there's concern about the impacts of recreation on natural, cultural, and tribal resources. And I think there's consensus, at least in the folks that we've been speaking with, including in our conversation with other state and federal land managers, that we need a more consistent methodology and process that hopefully we can share across agencies for monitoring the impacts of recreation on the land. So that these are really, this strategic priority and the use and impact monitoring, this is really foundational to all of the other pieces of the strategy. We need to have good data and good data management if we're going to make sound and science-based decisions. Planning, we're talking about recreation planning at a variety of scales. We're talking about essentially integrating into our planning that, and we already do quite a bit of planning, but integrating into our planning more intentional focus on outdoor recreation and determining where are the most compatible places, where's the best places for locating recreation on the land, at what times of the year, in order to concentrate recreation where it's most appropriate and the landscape is most durable, and divert it or at least thin it in those areas where habitat and resources are most sensitive. And there are a variety of tools that you'll see proposed in the REC strategy to do this. We're looking at a pilot with the Washington State Parks. Parks uses a land classification system, which has that sort of zoning approach to orienting different uses on the landscape. We're looking at DNR's model. They do a suitability analysis, which is also heavily based in mapping different uses at different times of year. And we're talking to these partners about pilots we can do together to learn from each other and understand how we can share data in these planning exercises. We're also looking at planning at the more landscape or granular scale, doing things like trails planning or camping area planning, signs planning, some of these kind of nuts and bolts things about the organization of activities and access on the landscape. One other pilot that I want to mention that pretty excited about is, we do wildlife area planning for all of our wildlife areas. We have 33 wildlife areas across the state, and we do a plan every 8 to 10 years or so. We're integrating a new recreation planning module into that, and we're going to be piloting that in the METAL. So we're already working on that. So some of the stuff that's in this REC strategy, we've already started to work on. Statewide and local rulemaking. So we spoke with our enforcement captains across the state, and we talked to our land managers, and we've talked with partners to get a sense of what are some of the big issues that we need to really increase clarity around for folks who are visiting DFW land, so people know the rules of the road when they get here. Some of the high priority topics for statewide rules are addressing the illegal creation of routes and of roads and trails, camping, cutting standing trees, rules around stream bank easements. We have a large number of miles of stream bank easements around the state that we want to make more accessible as an asset for people who want to fish, particularly, but we need to clarify some rules around those. Things like dog presence and training and drones, these are all topics that are kind of top of mind. There's not an exhaustive list of the things that we need to do rulemaking around, but it's a pretty good start. And then the second one on the slide about area-specific rules, not all of the rules that we need have to be applied in a blanket manner across the state. Some are very specific to specific situations, in particular wildlife areas or even within wildlife area units. So we're developing a system to be much more strategic and surgical in how we are instituting regulations on the ground. A lot of these places the access rules are already there in the form of signage, but we want to make those rules more enduring. And also, we think that people should know the rules before they schlep out to one of these wildlife areas or wildlife area units and are surprised. So we want to have a more centralized way to communicate area-specific rules. Travel management. This is a really big area, and this is a body of work that is going to take us. This is a 10-year strategy, and this is going to take us probably that 10 years and more to really get a handle on. We have something like 1,700 miles of roads on DFW managed lands, 211 designated trails, and we have a lot more roads and trails like that than that too, that were created either by legacy uses like mineral extraction or forestry, or they could be just user-created trails. We need to first get a clear sense of what's out there. We need an inventory that tells us, how many linear miles of roads and trails do we have? What's their condition? What is the maintenance schedule we need to put in place? What are the intended uses? Currently we have a policy on our lands, for the most part, outside of the green dot system, which is mostly, I think, in Region 3, where roads are open unless signed closed, and it makes it really difficult to manage roads in a good way for access with that practice. So we're going to move to a practice with roads, especially that roads are closed unless designated open. This will give us a better handle on managing, especially roads that were created by the recreating public and often in places that could be really bad for natural and cultural and tribal resources. Next, we have education and engagement. There's a lot of small print on this slide, in part because this is a big area of work. A lot of this has to do with developing stronger collaborative relationships, ongoing collaborative relationships with tribes, with other government partners. This is about improving the representation, or at least improving access to our lands for people who have historically been excluded from public spaces. We have a couple of strategies that we want to deploy to that end. And just as a context, we've done a series of surveys over time, and I think this is true across public lands in the state, that the vast majority of people who use public lands in Washington are white, male, predominantly male folks over the age of 35. And we love those guys. I'm one of them. But I think we want the folks who visit DFW managed lands to reflect the rich diversity of the people who live and pay taxes and otherwise want to recreate in the state. So we're going to be working on doing some listening sessions. We want to engage communities of color in something called a Trusted Advocates program to help us design programs and evaluate them to determine how well they're serving communities of color. We also want to develop a statewide interpretation program. And by interpretation, I don't mean from language to language. I mean telling the stories of place. The places that we manage are not only just stunningly beautiful, but they're really rich in history, natural history, tribal history, cultural history, and there's also just a lot of work going on out there that people want to know about. So we want to get better at telling those stories. R3 stands for recruit, retain, and reactivate. So we are working on an agency-wide R3 plan for hunting and fishing, and that will have strong application on DFW managed lands. We still have a lot of folks who are very passionate about and want to continue to access DFW managed lands for those activities, and rightly so. And we want to make sure that they continue to have good experiences. Engaging volunteers, we have a couple of ideas there. There's some really good models in the state of trailhead ambassador or trail ambassador programs where volunteers help provide that sense of welcome and also some orientation to people. I mentioned how a lot of the people coming to public lands are kind of new at it, and are looking for some help. So engaging volunteers, and maybe some folks on this call would be interested in being involved in something like that. I hope so. But also things like community science, helping to collect data, are things that we would love help from recreationists on, and volunteers. And then managing conflict. When you have a lot of people sometimes feeling like they need to compete for physical space, when they have different ideas of how to recreate, or what kinds of recreation should be primary in a given place, we do sometimes have conflict, and we want to better equip our local managers to handle those conflicts locally. Most of them are things that can be worked out really if we can just get people to sit down around a table and have a good conversation. Obviously, in this COVID environment, sitting around an actual table can be difficult, but I am praying we get back to that. And then lastly, but not leastly, educating visitors on how and where to recreate responsibly. I want to do a shout out to the Recreate Responsibly Coalition. If any of the members are on this call, WDFW was an early member. It was formed when kind of COVID just rocked our world, and suddenly we were having to close lands and reopen lands and then close them again. And the Recreate Responsibly Coalition did a really masterful job at developing messages and helping keep everyone kind of informed and hopefully safe out there. So we want to continue to work with coalitions like the Recreate Responsibly Coalition, but also improve messaging in the form of better signage, better website, better information that people have, again, before they get in their car, or on their bike and travel to one of the lands we manage, and find out when they get there that they can't do what they wanted to do. So those are some of the education and engagement projects. And then this is the last strategic priority that I'll mention, but it's certainly critical. All of these strategies that I've mentioned, and there are more in the document that I hope you'll have a chance to review, are going to take resources, and it's going to take people, it's going to take funding to make this stuff happen. And not only funding and DFW staff, but again, strong collaborative partnerships where we can work with folks like tribes and other state governments and nonprofits to get some of the work done that needs to be done out on the landscape. Some of the projects, fortunately, that are going to improve recreation experiences for folks visiting DFW lands are part of the current legislative session and part of the current budget process. And Cynthia, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. I can go ahead.
Sure. So, I think really, sorry, I'm getting some feedback here. Is that any better? Yeah. We really have seen kind of a wave of acknowledgement of the value and need and the benefit of access to public lands for mental and physical health over the last couple of years. And this has raised interest and to the level of the legislature at this point. So right now we have two budget requests into the legislature. One is a one-time authority for additional $500,000 in Discover Pass funds that would support the water access area management. Those areas are just really getting hit hard across the state with heavy use, and we just need an additional staff capacity to keep them clean and sanitary and safe and enjoyable for everyone. And then we have an ongoing package, which is 3.5 million, which includes the sustainable staffing model for those water access area staff. So the 500,000 is sort of a bridge to the ongoing funding. And then it includes staffing for a couple of wildlife area needs related to recreation. One is support for education and outreach in the Green Dot road system for ORV road system use in Kittitas, Chelan, and Yakima counties. And there's also staffing to help us with all the rules that Joel mentioned. There's some data management expertise that we need. There's some planning expertise that we need to kind of fill these things out. And then there's a recreation coordinator position, one for the east side and one for the west side of the state, to really connect people to the opportunities that are available to them. And then there's funding for biologists to help us measure and monitor the ecological impacts of recreation in utilizing our ecological integrity monitoring approach. So those are the staffing pieces, and then we have just some ongoing needs for things like kiosks and signs and fences and road maintenance, that kind of stuff, and litter removal, all the things that sometimes aren't the most exciting things that need to get done, but we need them to be able to manage that use across the landscape. So we're pretty excited about those budget items. They were in the governor's budget. We have yet to see the House or Senate budgets. And then we do have some leadership from WTA and TPL that is looking at recreation backlog maintenance needs for all three state agencies, state parks, DNR, and DFW, at $5 million a year ongoing. And I hear there's pretty great bipartisan support in the legislature for that right now. So we're looking forward to that coming to fruition. It's being championed by Representative Ryu and Senator Warnock.
Thanks, Cynthia. So just to recap some of our near-term priorities, so that I just ran you through kind of the suite of things that we're going to be working on. Just in the short term, some of our priorities are making DFW-managed lands more welcoming, and that's by doing things like improve signage, improve the website, improve information for folks who are wanting to visit, as well as do some of the important DEI-related work that we need to do to make sure that our lands are welcoming to the diversity of people in the state. Collecting and analyzing data. I mentioned kind of at the top that this is really foundational. It's about collecting information on how many people, what they're doing, where they're going, and it's also about inventorying facilities, getting a track of how many roads we have, how many trails, how many informal roads and trails. So there's a big need for data collection and capacity to do that. Curtailing illegal activity. This relates not only to the work on rulemaking, but also we have an ongoing need to build capacity for law enforcement out in the regions. And that's just an ongoing need that DFW as well as other land managers face and continue to face. Learning by doing. I mentioned the pilot planning exercises in the METAO. We're going to be doing access area planning in Region 4, which is Northwest Washington, travel management pilot in Region 2 out in the Columbia Basin. Really looking at, we don't want to just talk and try to develop these mega strategies. We want to test things on the ground and learn while we're doing and improve things as we go. Really focusing on the areas with the highest need first. And then ramping up capacity all the things Cynthia mentioned that we're working on in the current budget cycle are in this category. Maintenance backlog, providing the service levels that people deserve out at water access areas and the clean spaces and sanitized places that people want and deserve. So we need to ramp up capacity for that, as well as start to look at these key positions around planning and rulemaking, and then developing those collaborative relationships. So those are the things that we have kind of on our near-term priorities. And when I say near-term priorities, I'm mostly talking about kind of within the next 2-3 years. So we'll come back and we'll talk about next steps. But before we do that, wanted to pass it over to you, Cynthia, for the Q&A section.
Yeah, so if you have a question, you could just use the raise hand function. I will call on you. I did put in the chat that I'm happy to send around the fact sheet for our recreation needs decision packages, if that's helpful to anyone. I also, just to drive home the point, we spend the exact same amount of money on our water access areas today as we did in 1991. Which kind of blows my mind. And at that time, we estimated we were only at, providing 35% of our full service needs. Great, thanks, Mark. I think I'll send it to the list so folks could get it. So, Mindy, are you raising your hand or just identifying yourself? Maybe you're just identifying yourself. Feel free to speak if you have a question. No questions? Everyone's sleeping? Forgot your coffee?
Oh.
Here we go.
Cynthia?
Go ahead, Bruce. Yeah. Go ahead, Bruce. Can't hear anything, Bruce. Are you speaking?
I have lost your audio.
Hey, I apologize. I'm on the phone and so I can't raise my hand.
Okay.
My name's Wayne. It said hit *6 and you're unmuted. So I apologize for just rudely butting in, but I think that's my only option. But can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great. Thanks, Bruce. Go ahead.
Okay. Just a quick question then regarding the effort to recruit more people, especially in terms of the diversity and equity issues, to look for other demographics to get them involved in hunting, fishing, and other outdoor activities. That sounds to me like it's just like a classic marketing approach. I mean, they do this all the time with products, for example. So the question is there something in your budget for getting help from a marketing professional, a consultant, say, who can help you lay the pathway to do that efficiently and with great effect?
So I guess specific to the DEI component, is that what you're asking, Bruce?
Well, my name's Wayne, but
oh, I'm sorry, Wayne.
It's specific to. That's okay. It's specific to that, like the RRR. I think it was 5.2 and 5.3 in the report, where you're talking about trying to reach out to other demographic groups in particular to get them more involved in outdoor recreation at our recreation sites.
And I can maybe start, Cynthia. So thanks for the question, Wayne. We do have some funding set aside to do a series of listening sessions, which essentially would be focus groups, kind of a marketing technique, right? With particularly with underrepresented or historically excluded folks, to really understand what are the recreation interests, needs, potential barriers to recreating, feeling welcome on the lands we manage. So we do have some funds set aside for that. There's been a lot of work, and there's, fortunately, and I think it's long overdue, there's a lot of work being done collectively by various agencies in the state around this space. So we're not trying to duplicate what other folks are doing. We're trying to learn from the other studies that have been done, both regionally and nationally, but then really try to drill down a little bit to what specifically can we be doing. And I think it's not just about marketing the opportunities and things that are already there. I think what we hope to accomplish with the Trusted Advocates program, and Trusted Advocates program is something it's used a lot in more in like urban and county planning, but the idea is that you contract with representatives or liaisons within specific communities that you're hoping to communicate with, and really engaging those communities, not just in giving them marketing information about what they can do, hunting or fishing, but also, how can we design programs? How can we design facilities with your communities in mind, so that we can kind of go that next step, not just kind of marketing, but hopefully developing and designing programs with communities who aren't using our land so much, so that there will be added incentive and sense of ownership to participate. That's a little long-winded, Wayne. I don't know if that was helpful, but I hope so.
I would just add that and I've got three hands up so far, that the R3 body of work, as Joel said, there's nationally, Fish and Wildlife agencies are working on this. This is bigger than just WDFW managed lands, so we have a bigger cross section of the agency working on this, including our internal marketing resources, and so that will be ongoing. And as Joel mentioned, there will be integrated elements that occur on WDFW managed lands. So I've got Bruce Thompson, Deborah Rogers, and Robert Cruz.
Hi, Cynthia. This is Bruce. I finally got all the buttons to work.
Hi, Bruce. It's so great to hear your voice.
Oh, I'm glad to participate in this. I'm sitting in as a member of the Skagit Wildlife Area Management Advisory Committee, so that's why I'm here. Hopefully a quick comment. Actually, I think the content of this plan is really quite good. My comment is going to relate to, I guess, an aspect of the monitoring. I'm concerned that this plan, which is a 10-year plan that's part of a 25-year department strategy, doesn't really contain a satisfactory assessment element. And what I mean by that is there's a whole lot of output-oriented, monitoring and considerations, but I don't see any real assessment of outcomes. So I'm not going to go deep. I just would say I think you need to, whoever's involved, sit back a bit and examine how this strategic endeavor is constructed to ensure that you don't just monitor, which we all know you can monitor things into oblivion and get nothing, but to actually monitor the objectives. Assess the objectives, so that what this plan is intended to achieve, you're actually collecting information along the way, but not just collecting, but actually performing those sequential assessments to determine if your objectives and the actions that are following those objectives are truly coming to the outcomes that you're seeking, and not just a series of outputs. So that's my comment for it. But I'll end by saying I really enjoyed reading through the strategy and seeing the sensibility in the actions that are being suggested. Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. Your comments are really well taken. One, thank you for taking the time to dig in and read through the plan and give us your thoughts. I resonate with your desire for an outcomes-based approach. Part of why the monitoring that we're mostly been talking about is really about developing data systems and data management systems, which is like the least sexy thing to talk about on on a webinar, but is really, in terms of setting outcomes, we need those data sets to establish baselines so that we can, over the time that we're implementing this strategy and beyond, be monitoring outcomes and making sure that, we're not just doing a bunch of stuff, that we're really moving the needle around those two big goals that I mentioned, which are, improving protection for natural, cultural, and tribal resources and enhancing recreation access and experience. We need ways to measure those outcomes. The data sets are really critical to that. But I think your comments are really well taken as a challenge to really think through what are the outcomes that you expect to see in 5 years, 10 years. And I think, like I said, those comments are well taken, and we'll take those to heart.
Thank you. We've got Deborah, Robert, and Elizabeth, and then Jess.
So I think I'm up. Hi, Cynthia and Joel. First of all, I want to say thank you. I really appreciated reading through the draft document, and we're working on revising some. So I should say, first of all, I'm not on an advisory committee, but we do own and manage nature preserves in Washington and in California. And recreation or public use is always a big part of those management plans and of the activity of our on-the-ground preserve managers. So I was very interested to see how you are approaching that. And of course, I'm very respectful and in awe of all that you and the Washington properties are challenged with doing, both protecting the natural resources and allowing all this multitude of opportunities for the ever-increasing public. That's a great challenge, and I really respect that. You mentioned near the beginning and in the report as well, or the plan as well, that COVID was a trigger towards further realizing the importance of availability of outdoor opportunities to the public. And certainly true, but also, as we all know, it's also been unplanned experimental frame to look at impacts of the visiting public, especially during the early days of the pandemic, when so many open spaces, parks, preserves were closed, and scientists seized that opportunity to look at what happens when natural resources are released from that kind of public visitation pressure, even when it's non-consumptive uses, when it's just walking, hiking. And that's something that we're trying to consider more fully. So I would just like to say, we've spent, for one of our plans in particular, we've really dived into the literature to look at COVID-related literature. That is what happens when those pressures are removed from preserves, and also other scientific literature that sort of follows the frame of the figure that you put up earlier, that shows the different categories of impacts that we as humans can have, even, again, non-consumptive uses. So we have quite a literature base. We're happy to share that if that's of value to anyone on the phone. And primarily my request is just, I'm very interested, and this is somewhat related to the earlier question, I'm very interested in your, the details of how you will be measuring impacts. So, we count people on some of our preserves. We actually count the visiting public. We have trail counters at the beginning of trails, but actually documenting, monitoring impact is much more difficult, as you know, unless it's, yes, we can describe if people are creating their own trails and if they're actually dead bodies of species, that's the low-hanging fruit. But as we all know, the impacts are probably there in principle, but they're difficult to measure. And it's because there's so many things going on. There's so many moving parts. It's hard. And the impacts are cumulative and interactive. So I'm very interested in the ways that you and others may be thinking about measuring impacts from the visiting public, with the idea of How do we assign cause effect, and then what do we do about it? Following up from the previous person's comment, as opposed to monitoring just being open-ended, how do we monitor? And then if we have evidence of some direct connection between public use and impact, what do we do with that information? How do we mitigate it? So I'm both offering information if people are interested in our literature that we've accumulated, but also very interested in learning more about how you're measuring impacts. Thank you.
Cynthia, do you want to start? I can add on, or do you want me to just jump in?
Well, yeah, I would just say thank you, and for sure we'll look forward to collaborating and learning from you. We're sort of on the edge of this, and we're working with the other agencies on it as well. So yeah, go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, it's a really tough nut to crack. The ecological integrity monitoring system that Cynthia referenced earlier, we did a pilot with that. I forget the national model that it's based on, but we did a pilot with DNR, and it collects a lot of different data points around ecological function, ecosystem function. And to do that on all public lands in all places would be astronomically expensive, to the point where we've determined it's not really feasible. So what we're hoping to come up with, in partnership with tribes and other land managers, and I would echo what Cynthia said, would love to benefit from your research and thinking on this, is a very targeted strategic approach. First, obviously, we have to figure out what impacts we're most concerned about that we want to measure. Then we have to figure out what areas specifically do we want to measure them in, and maybe what subset of data points we want to be tracking over time. WDFW recently updated its grazing program and policy, and that includes a monitoring protocol it's a very stripped down, simple version related to ecological integrity monitoring, but directed specifically at impacts that are most commonly associated with grazing, related to forbs and particular grass species or whatever it is. I think we have to get similarly tactical, specific with recreation impacts. And this is something, like I said, that the tribes we've heard a lot of interest from, and the other state agencies. So I think it's an area really ripe for collaboration, because if we can come up with a system that we're applying across multiple landscapes, not just DFW managed lands or your wildlife refuges, I think we should be trying to come up with a similar system. I think that would be good both for the resources as well as for the public's understanding, because one of the things that we firmly believe is that when people understand the impacts they're having, they're open to changing behavior and changing their level of access, but they need that science-based case to understand, and we need to as well for our management. So thank you for your comments and questions, and we definitely would love to trade information and be in touch.
Thanks. Yeah, Robert.
First, thank you so much for sharing this plan with the public. It's really a wonderful thing to have the opportunity to be involved and begin this process with you and go on the 10-year and the 25-year journey together. Thank you. I also I would certainly sanction the suggestions that a framework for assessment be presented and worked on. I think that's going to be key in over time, being able to really evaluate where we all come out on this working together. My request is if you could please provide some examples of where the public has been, or certain factions of the public have been excluded from public lands. If you could provide some examples of that and examples of just what makes up this notion of exclusionary problem. I'd like to learn more about that.
Robert, thanks for the question. I think there's a lot of evidence and there's a lot of literature on this that there are deep-rooted systemic reasons why some communities don't feel safe or don't participate. They think of public lands differently than other groups. So I think there's no one at a gate deciding who can or can't go in. But I think we can all recognize that there are hidden barriers and impediments that are just deeply rooted in systems of oppression and historical impacts of who outdoor recreation has been primarily marketed to, who is considered kind of the target demographic for many, many years for coming to and enjoying public lands. And I think, the work that I think of that we need to do is to understand some of those historical systems and how they manifest in relationship to outdoor recreation and specifically DFW managed lands. And I won't presuppose what we're going to learn in that exercise, but I think the numbers are speak pretty loudly in terms of who is currently enjoying these lands. And I'm not saying, we're not going for some quota related to, what percentage of different groups that have to be out on the landscape, but I want to make sure that the fact that there's such a delta between the demographics of who's coming and who lives in the state is not due to something that we could be addressing. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Well, those are general comments. I was looking for something more specific, but if you aren't able to provide that, so be it.
We'll have more information, I think, after our listening sessions. Sorry, Cynthia.
Yeah, I would say that I think we're in the situation where we know the demographics tell us that there is a mismatch, but we don't actually know. We don't have very much information to say why that is. So we're all learning together right now.
Yeah, please stay tuned. We hope to have better information in the near term.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Elizabeth, good afternoon. Let's see, are you able to turn on, unmute yourself? I'm not hearing you yet. Okay, I'm going to go to Jeff and Elizabeth. You can, well, hold on one sec. See if I can unmute you. Oh, are you there?
Do you have me now?
There you go.
Okay, sorry. I was trying to use the wrong button. Anyway, okay, I had a question about the ecological integrity monitoring. I was a volunteer out at Scatter Creek that worked on that, but Joel answered my question that basically you've determined that that's too intensive and wouldn't work very well for your purposes. So, but I do have another question, and it's about how you plan to resolve or remove conflicting uses on the wildlife areas. For example, where you have a historic use that's damaging a rare species habitat. How how do you plan to address that that situation?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I would say just on the ecological integrity monitoring thing really quickly, we don't think it's too intensive. I think in an ideal world, we would be doing ecological integrity monitoring everywhere. What we currently just find that it's not very feasible in terms of budget, but we do think it provides a good foundation, or at least a springboard, to take a more targeted approach. On the second question, a lot of the strategies that are in the 10-year strategy are directed at both kind of preventing from the situation that you're identifying from happening, but also hopefully reducing those impacts. And a lot of that's through planning and the identification of, where are these sensitive areas, sensitive species, culturally or tribally sensitive resources that we need to better protect? And how do we then orient on the landscape things like roads and trails, or different uses, so that there isn't that conflict that you're describing? I do think, just to be really candid, it can be difficult once an activity is well established in a place to reel it back in and prevent it. But that is not off the table. I think, we have to take a very close look in a very case-by-case manner at the lands that we're responsible for, and understand, our top priority remains protection of natural and cultural resources and tribal resources. And if that means, enacting a new form of management in an area, then we may need to do that. Generally, our goal is not to close areas that people are enjoying, and especially if they've been enjoying them for sometimes generations. But this comes back to, I think, the point that a couple of folks have made about assessment and monitoring. To be clear, like, what are the implications of recreation in a given place, and what is our duty to that place, the resources as well as the people who are recreating. We also try not to make kind of unilateral decisions. So our planning is done in collaboration with, we hope, diverse stakeholders who share a similar value for both conservation as well as recreation. Folks like yourself on this call. We rely on your judgment as well as ours and the science, et cetera, to make these decisions. And sometimes they can be really heated and difficult, but that's kind of goes with the territory. So planning, rulemaking, how we invest in facilities, all of those things relate, I think, Elizabeth, to your question about how to protect kind of these precious resources that are kind of our primary charge.
Yeah, and I would just add to that we did do a bit of research a few years ago about what we know and think to our value, our landslide, and management needs that they have. And there's a very clear signal from a representative sample of Washingtonians across the state that conserving fish and wildlife is the predominant expectation, which is good because that's in line with our mission. And that while access is also a very high expectation and value, that as long as there's a clear link between why you would need to limit access, and that link is back to the resource protection, the natural cultural resource protection, people are willing to accept those limitations. So, we're in the business of conserving fish and wildlife habitat and managing for species as an agency, and we offer opportunities within within the needs of those conservation elements. So we just need to get better at, as we've talked about, the assessment and the linkage between the use and the impact and the direction of the use to the places that will avoid those impacts. So that's where we're at. It's not an easy thing to do, but it is the work that we are charged and honored to hold. So with that, I think we'll go to Jeff Larson.
Hey, thank you very much for putting this together. I do appreciate all of the work. I'm with the Master Hunter Advisory Group that helps support the Master Hunter Permit Program, and see lots of opportunities for the Master Hunters to help with volunteerism, as we have for 20 plus years on a lot of these wildlife areas. We'd like to continue to support that and continue to expand on that and provide a resource for Fish and Wildlife to be able to engage those members within those communities to help out and to help make your jobs easier. And hopefully that was kind of the rationale for the Master Hunter Permit Program. So we're looking forward to that. And I think you're going to find a ready partner with that. Just kind of a side note, I reviewed the document quite a few times, and section 3.11 and 3.12 talks about closing a lot of things or limiting things that are inherent in some user groups' use of the land. Can you extrapolate on closing game trails and things of that matter for those activities that potentially aren't as pristine as just simply on a gravel trail that's been provided? Anything along those lines? If you could expound on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you so much thank you for what you do as a volunteer with the Master Hunters Advisory Group and as a volunteer with that program. Incredible program for others who are less familiar with it on the call. I should by now have like all of the numbered sections imprinted on my brain. I've looked at it more than a few times myself, but I suspect I know what you're talking about. In the travel management section, there's, and I referenced this a little bit in my comments earlier about moving toward a model where roads and trails are closed unless designated open. And I've heard from other groups related to kind of the shooting sports and hunting sports specifically that you can't hunt from a trail. You can't stay on a trail. You can't stay on a road to hunt. And I want to just, and I hope that this question continues to come up because it's really key. Jen, thank you for that note that this is in the rulemaking section. But I think that this is the topic. Am I right, Jeff? That the closing of routes and trails. Am I on the right path here?
You are, and also things like mushroom picking and foraging, and in some respects, wildlife watching. Sometimes they don't. If you're going to go try to find a herd of bighorn, they're not going to be on the trail. So it's not just a hunting thing. It's pretty much all uses, and kind of where I was going. Yeah, it's exactly in that section.
Okay, good. Thank you. And great point. There are other uses outside of hunting. I'm a mushroom hunter myself. And I think, our first priority with those is going to be around roads. I think, we'll have a lot of work to do around roads. And part of the intent is to stop the creation of informal roads and trails across the landscape. We have a lot of routes that are being created on slopes, on sensitive areas, and in parts of the state, as you probably are well aware, once like 10 people walk a particular path, there's a trail there. And if 3 people drive their side-by-sides, there's suddenly a road. So I think we need to be more proactive in saying, this is a road that's available for use. This isn't. And and have a strong rationale for that. And similarly with trails, which is probably the priority after roads, we have a lot of informal trails. And over time, they start to show up on trail maps. And then, they're essentially, they become kind of part of the public use system. And some of those are good, but again, some of them are not. So we need a better system for understanding where the routes are and which ones are in good spots and where different uses can be on those. But for the dispersed uses, which I think is what you're concerned with, the intention is not to limit those dispersed uses. I think and this is, we've been talking about this a lot, and this a policy around this is one of the things that the strategy directs us to create. So the decisions have not been made yet on exactly how this is going to look, but let me tell you how I'm imagining it might work out based on how it's managed in some other places. For roads, I think we just have to be really clear which roads are available for vehicles to travel. And then for trails, I think we have to be really clear which ones are available for, non-walking recreation. So my thought is how it might go, and again, this is to be determined with partners like yourself, but how it might go is that walk-in access is pretty much possible anywhere. As long as you get off your out of your vehicle, or you get off your bicycle, you can walk through in a dispersed way. But actually traveling in a wheeled sense or on a horseback is going to probably require you being on a designated road or trail. Again, that decision is not made yet. That's just kind of how I imagine it might play out. But I guess the important thing to note is that we have no intention of restricting dispersed use into non-dispersed systems. That just really wouldn't work for a lot of these different users. And I do understand, because I've been getting a lot of comments like this, that there's some ambiguity about that in the draft that I think we need to clean up before it goes out for kind of its final version. So I appreciate the comment, and I hope that that's helpful.
It did. Thank you.
I can't seem to raise my hand, but I'd like to get in the queue for questions.
Okay, let's go to Darcy and then Herb, and then whoever the speaker just was.
Thanks.
Darcy? You may need to unmute yourself. You can. Okay, let's come back to Darcy. Maybe go to Herb? Gerhart?
Okay, I think I've got the right buttons pushed. It's Herb Gerhart. I've been a volunteer for wildlife in the past, and I'm also on the South Puget Sound Wildlife Committee presently. And target shooting. I appreciate that you got the words in there, but I would like to stress that target shooting is a very, very popular recreation and getting more popular every day, and it creates lots of conflict with recreational users of all types. I would encourage you to designate some areas. You're working on it in Eastern Washington. I appreciate that. That's a big step forward that DNR is not willing to address. And but you need to, in a landscape where it's feasible, designate areas for target shooting. And if you can put that in the plan, just in a planning plan, that this is something needs to be looked at. I would appreciate that. And presently, I've been pushing DNR. I've been volunteering for DNR since the mid-90s, and I'm out there every single day volunteering for them. And I've been pushing to them, and they just not willing to listen on target shooting at all. I've had Tim Sheldon sponsor bill in the past. I got their attention, but did not. It died off again as usual. And presently, there is another bill in the Senate Bill 5865, which is we'll have a hearing on the 27th of this month on target shooting on DNR lands, which is public lands. And I'd appreciate any help that wildlife can do in persuading DNR that this bill needs to pass and they need to do something. And their excuse always is the Attorney General says we can't do this for liability's sake. And I keep telling them, well, how come wildlife can? They have the same Attorney General, and he's not making different decisions. It's just DNR does not want to do it. So any help you can generate in prodding them to support this, and anybody in the audience here, please support it too. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I have Herb, thank you for your comments, and thank you for all the volunteering you do for DNR as well as for us. Target shooting is one of the things that we have in the recreation planning section, because we also see the increased interest and need to provide locations. We did rulemaking. It wrapped up about a year ago, addressing dispersed target shooting, which is still allowed on DFW managed lands. But we also do designate areas, and we're making investments in designated areas. We have a couple of projects, I think, that recently got some funding, and Cynthia, maybe you can help me out on that. But like Swakane Canyon, I think, for example. But just to talk for a second, it's a little bit, not to go too long on it, but the Senate bill that you referenced, Herb, the 5865, which is about something called the Recreation Immunity Statute, and it adds the creation of target shooting ranges under the list of things that are covered by the statute. Our position is actually, I think we believe that the statute already covers target shooting, both dispersed as well as in shooting ranges. So we don't necessarily see a need to add that language into the statute because we feel like, as you've noted, we're already doing it, because our best advice has been that the statute already covers target shooting, both dispersed target shooting as well as in ranges. So that's kind of our position on that. And we'd be happy to chat with you after if you'd like about that particular topic.
Okay. Well, I fully agree with you. The bill really isn't needed, but DNR is digging in saying that they can't do it because they're going to sue us, and the Attorney General told us that's required. And wildlife has been doing it all along, and I haven't seen where you're being sued. But the problem here is in the Tahuya, which is the best ORV mecca of Western Washington, and it's all on DNR land. The people target shooting, they can target shoot, dispersed target shooting is legal. And DNR says, well, let them shoot wherever they want. And I says, there's trails, there's people recreating, there's mushroom pickers, there's brush pickers, there's idiots like me that walk through the brush. Bullets are going to whiz by. I'm surprised nobody's gotten killed yet. So I'm just looking for a safety aspect. Like you have in pheasant release areas, you have a hunter safety zone, and you put signs around it. This is a safety zone, and that's what I'm sort of looking for. Not an organized deal, but just a safety area, say 5 acres or whatever out of a 20,000 acre forest, and say, okay, this is a safety zone for target shooters. So, but I know you're way ahead of the game. I'm just trying to get you to go prod DNR since you're in the same building. Thanks.
Thanks, Herb.
Okay, I think my mute button is back to working. Sorry about that. Darcy is still not able to get her microphone going. So we have Bill Essman and then Norm Gutzweiler.
Then I was in line too.
All right, the person who
Oh,
was
I'm
on.
sorry. Yes. Sorry about that. Go
Hi.
ahead.
Okay, sorry. Hi, this is Kevin Clements. I am here in my capacity as a member of the Qualicum Wildlife Area Advisory Committee, but I'm also on several of the other represented organizations here. Kind of echoing what Jeff was saying about the dispersed uses, and I'm really glad to hear that you're planning on going back and working on a way to incorporate dispersed uses into the planning, because when you read it now, it doesn't really seem to make much allowance for hunters and mushroom pickers, etc. I'm interested in why are we going to everything is prohibited unless it's specifically open model, kind of like state parks, rather than a evidence-based, when you have a problem, close something, or if you can show evidence of a problem, close something. This seems to be contrary to the idea of diverse and open and welcoming public lands. And specifically, it seems that motorized, we could draw a pretty bright line between motorized uses and non-motorized. You've got the model of the green dot road system in central Washington, which has its problems, but it's worked pretty well for almost 40 years, 35 years. And that gives you a model where things are not open for motorized use unless they are open for motorized use. And so user-built roads are closed. And you can, it's not perfect. It's got its problems, but it's a model. But for walking, human-powered use, and for camping for dispersed use, it seems that we've got an enforcement and an outreach and a maintenance problem, and we're trying to cure it with more rules and regulations rather than enforcing the rules we have and reaching out to the recreators to explain to them why they can't do these uses. So that's kind of the heart of my comments, and thanks for everything you guys are doing.
Thanks, Kevin. I don't know if your ears were burning. So Kevin, thanks for your work on the Qualicum and also on the East Cascade Recreational Partnership. After the meeting last week, where I think you shared some similar comments, I had a conversation with Ross Huffman, who you know well, and really take your comments to heart. And I hope what I said to Jeff kind of rang true. To your question about like, why are we going down this path? I think part of the challenge for us is that we can't keep up with the vast number of routes that are out there that are currently being used. And when we start designating routes, I think we then are making a commitment to their upkeep, to their safety, to their maintenance. The green dot system, I think, is a good model that we will be looking at exporting to other parts of the state. And like I said, roads are roads are sort of first on the list of things to address, because you're right. It's much easier to make clear judgments around that. But then I hope that some of the comments that I made to Jeff about walking in and walk-in and dispersed use was helpful, and the promise that your comments and his and others that are similar will have us taking a second look at the wording in in the draft.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. That was very reassuring, actually.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And Joel, there's also, Darcy was able to just put in the chat that she's concerned that closed and less open camping will set a precedent for DNR Forest Service to end dispersed camping. And then she additionally says homeless camping should not be considered recreation either.
Yeah, on the second point, homeless, you know, we don't refer generally to homeless camping. We talk about residential camping, which is already not allowed via our rules. In terms of dispersed camping and the concern that it would be setting a precedent that the federal land managers might follow, I mean, I think that that's a fair point. And like with roads, you know, rules around roads and trails, the conversation around camping is certainly one that we still need to have. So please stay engaged, and you know, when we start looking at rules related to camping, we'd love to, you know, have you involved in the conversation.
Right, great. And then Norm Gutzweiler, and we are at 3:30, so we understand if people need to drop to respect your time. I know that I'm willing to stay a bit longer. I predict that Joel is as well. So at this point, we've got at least one more question.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
okay,
go ahead.
Thank you very much for doing this. I appreciate it. I think it's important that we try to recruit recreationalists into our land. It's important that we get folks out of the house and into the fresh air, and we have areas of plenty of fresh air. But our studies and our long-term, are we going to require a lot of money? And I haven't seen how we are going to put this whole process together and who's going to pay for that. We don't do these things for nothing. Secondarily, how are we going to address the improvement of quality and quantity of our upland bird and big game for the hunters and the fishers, because basically that's the biggest share of our income to do studies, and of course our WDFW folks that are constantly out in the area are funded by our licenses. We can't continue to go out and work with all the recreational areas through just our hunting and fishing licenses. And so as we look at this whole package, I think we need to go back, talk to our legislators and say, recreation is here, it's important, being outside is important. We need funding from others than those folks that are hunters and fishers. And I would like to see you put that into a plan. Go to Olympia, even though I know money's very tight, they need to help us follow through with all of our studies and come up with our new plan. Okay?
Thank you. I mean, I would just say, Norm, thanks for your comments. You know, certainly one, you know, we know as well as any, you know, fish and wildlife agencies across the country know that revenue from hunting and fishing has been a real core piece of conservation. And you know, the people who hunt and fish too are some of the most ardent and active conservationists. But to your point that, you know, we need other sources of funding. Yeah, we do have other sources of funding that we're currently using. I think something, correct me if I'm wrong, Cynthia, but I think like 30% of our budget is from licenses, approximately. And the rest of it is from like a hodgepodge of places, including places like grants from RCO and places that are focused on recreation. But we do need, as we said in the capacity piece, we are going to need additional funding Because those of you on the call who work with our wildlife area managers know that they're already really, really busy. So the goal of this strategy is not to just add more work to the plates of people who are already overstressed and overtapped, but we will need some new folks and some creative partnerships to increase our workforce to get some of this done. And any support from this group and others with the legislature and others around that point is certainly welcome. So thank you.
Yeah, and we just can't afford to lose our hunters and fishers because our quality or our quantity of wildlife and birds is struggling. We need to keep those folks coming back year in and year out and bringing new people into the hunting and fishing arena so that those licenses are being purchased. And so we need to make sure our quantity and our quality is there.
Agreed. Thank you, Norm.
Yeah, and I would just add to that conversation, Joel, you're correct. It's, the wildlife state account from the licenses is probably less than 20% of what we manage our lands with. We do get a good chunk from the Pittman Robertson funds as well. But we also have Discover Pass. We have other state funds. We're increasingly getting funded by general fund state. We have a fair amount of local and federal mitigation funding that comes in as well. So it's a fairly diverse portfolio that we utilize to manage our lands.
Sure. And the Pittman Robertson, and that's hunting. So, all right. Thank you very much for what you do.
Thank you so much, Norm. You as well.
So Cynthia, can I just wrap up with next steps? So thank you all who have sort of stuck with us through the end here in a couple of minutes over where we are in the process right now with this. We're doing an extended public comment period so that we can take comments like we've heard today and improve the draft. We also did something that I'm not sure the agency has done with other plans, but I hope will become more the norm. We translated the draft into Spanish, and we're really trying to get it out to as many folks as we can. So any help that this group can provide in pushing out the draft for more comments would be deeply appreciated. We'll be taking all the comments. We'll be making kind of revisions as we go, but we hope to wrap up the revisions in March. And then it is a 10-year strategy, so the implementation is going to stretch out to at least 2031, which sounds like a long ways away, but I think will be kind of on us before we know it. So that's where we're headed. So I guess with that, we'll just wrap up. I want to thank everyone for participating today. Thank you for all that you do as volunteers on the various advisory committees. And Cynthia, any closing thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, just the same thing. Thanks for your time and interest in all you do for DFW and for lands. And we look forward to any other comments. And please do spread the word and let folks know about the public hearings that are also coming up later in February.
One last plug too, the rec strategy. We need lots of great pictures of people recreating out on the land. We'd love your help. I'm going to put this link in the chat as well. And maybe I'm not, but I will send it out to the group. We'd love photos of you, your friends, your loved ones out enjoying DFW managed lands. That would be really helpful and hopefully a small slice of fame for the people in those pictures. So thanks a lot. Thanks, Cynthia.
Thanks, everyone.